this is her opportunity to introduce herself to the American people, to tell them her story, because people don't really have a clear idea of her. They know that she's the vice president. They know that she had some responsibility for that vexed southern border with Mexico, where immigration was at an all-time high, but now those crossings have come down a bit. But they don't really know that much about her. So when she speaks on Thursday night in front of millions of viewers, most likely, it is an opportunity for her to define herself and to define this race.
Now, let's head to the US, where Kamala Harris is now leading Donald Trump amongst likely voters in the state of Arizona. She's also edged ahead of him in North Carolina, a state Donald Trump won 4 years ago. And she has narrowed his lead in other states such as Georgia and Nevada. That's according to a new poll for the New York Times. And it comes as Kamala Harris has called for millions of new build homes and first time buyers help, tax breaks for families, and a ban on so called grocery price gouging, addressing the economic problems facing many families in her first big speech on the issue. At the rally in North Carolina last night, the Democratic nominee said she'd witnessed financial hardships while she was working at McDonald's. Well, Donald Trump said the vice president had already had more than 3 years in the administration to deliver her promises and called her dangerously liberal. At a news conference outside his Bedminster Golf Club, the Republican presidential nominee also said he's entitled to make personal attacks on Harris. Well, Laura Trevelyan is a journalist and former BBC anchor who's been covering the US for more than 20 years and joins us now. Hello, Laura.
Carol, great to be with you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Let me ask you, first of all, about those new polls apparently showing Kamala Harris making gains in quite a few of the crucial swing states and beyond.
Well, that's right, Carol. If you think that this race really is about seven key states, seven states that will probably change hands at this election. And if they do, that will determine the outcome, the so-called swing states. Three of them are in the Midwest. You have Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The last set of reliable polls from there showed that Kamala Harris was ahead. And then today you have four polls from the New York Times, very respected polling organization with the Siena organization, and the so-called Sun Belt, that's Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, and North Carolina. You have essentially a dead heat in those states. You have Kamala Harris up in North Carolina, and you then have Donald Trump up in Georgia. So very interesting, because Donald Trump's path of victory runs through the Sun Belt, really. So he doesn't want a position where he's lagging in the Midwest and essentially tied in the Sun Belt. And for Kamala Harris, these polls are very encouraging, but they are extremely close. They are within the margin of error, Carol, but it does show that in the month since Joe Biden dropped out of this race, the energy has been transformed. It's gone in the direction of Kamala Harris. Question is, can she keep that momentum up, though, Carol? This week, she should be able to. It's the Democratic National Convention. Democrats will head to Chicago, but Republicans are very much hoping that that convention is overshadowed by the specter of protests by pro-Palestinian lobby groups calling for an end to that war. You've been reporting on hopes for a ceasefire there, but the stage is certainly set for some tense confrontations between the police and those pro-Palestinian protesters.
Yeah, fascinating. Just to remind people listening that the reason that we focus on these so-called swing states is because of the way the US president is elected. Each state delivers a certain number of votes into the electoral college. And because we know which way so many states are going to go, it comes down to just a few that could go either way. You talk about the Democratic Convention there. I also just wanted to ask you about the key messaging, because it was interesting to hear Kamala Harris talking last night about the economy. It's always a very important issue in any election. And whether she has obviously revived the Democrats' fortunes, and has Donald Trump really worked out a way to counter her appeal?
Well, what Donald Trump is trying to do, of course, is to tie her to the economic record of President Biden. She's the vice president in this administration. The Wall Street Journal is reporting today that groceries are 26% more expensive than they were in 2019. People have really felt the impacts of high inflation, even though it's coming down. Interest rates are still high, so that's hard for anybody with a mortgage or with credit card debt. So this is the message that Donald Trump is trying to hammer home and to tie Kamala Harris to the economic uncertainty that so many Americans are feeling. She, in that speech in North Carolina that you played a clip of, went for a really populist message. For example, she said that she would introduce a federal law against price gouging, trying to target those supermarkets and those landlords who are putting up the cost of groceries and rents way above inflation. But she's been criticized for something that would effectively amount to state intervention. So you can see the contours of Donald Trump's attack on Kamala Harris beginning to form. But it has been very difficult for him, and he also has struggled to stay on message. He gave a press conference at his Bedminster estate this week in New Jersey. He had a whole array of props like a Fruit Loop cereal box, all designed to demonstrate that how prices have gone up and inflation is a problem. But he veered off into personal attacks against his opponent, and his advisors worry that by not being disciplined, he'll lose an opportunity to shape the message against his opponent.
The Democratic National Convention, of course, it could have been the moment where the replacement for Joe Biden was chosen. Kamala Harris essentially had a clear run once the current president pulled out of the race. How important do you think this coming week is going to be in terms of shaping the campaigns as we head into the final few months of the battle for the White House?
Well, it's absolutely crucial for Kamala Harris. This is her opportunity to introduce herself to the American people, to tell them her story, because people don't really have a clear idea of her. They know that she's the vice president. They know that she had some responsibility for that vexed southern border with Mexico, where immigration was at an all-time high, but now those crossings have come down a bit. But they don't really know that much about her. So when she speaks on Thursday night in front of millions of viewers, most likely, it is an opportunity for her to define herself and to define this race. She's been talking broadly about we must go forward, not back, which sounds positive, but also a little bit vague. But this is her chance to really tie it down. But also on Monday night, we have President Biden will speak. He will pass the baton. So he gets to talk about his legacy and say why she would be a great next president, in his view. You'll also be hearing from other former presidents. You'll hear Bill Clinton and Barack Obama will speak, all of them burnishing the candidacy of Kamala Harris. So it's typical for candidates, Carol, to get a big bump coming out of their conventions. And this is a chance for her to build on what looks like a narrow polling lead at the moment.
And finally, and just briefly, if you can, we're hearing about the US side in the talks really talking up the prospects of a breakthrough in these negotiations on a possible ceasefire and hostage release in Gaza. Antony Blinken heading back out to the region. It does seem as though it is the US side which is driving the optimism here, perhaps an indication of how important it is for the reputation of the current administration.
Well, Carol, I think the administration wants a positive message on these ceasefire talks heading into the all-important Democratic National Convention next week. They want to do everything they can to try to blunt the force of the protests, which we know will be present in Chicago. Thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters are heading to Chicago, wanting this war to end. So if the administration is able to say that there's some prospect of a deal, and as you say, the spin from the administration sounds a lot more positive than that's coming, for example, from your guests on the Israeli side. But it's about presentation. It's about trying to say to these protesters, in essence, don't wreck this convention. This is Kamala Harris's chance to present herself to the world. And Republicans are looking for disorder. They're looking for disruption so that they can press home Donald Trump's law and order message that America would be safer under him. So it's a real example of the outside world having an impact on domestic politics.
Laura Trevelyan, great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol.